I'm Stephanie Kahn, and this is Friend of a Friend. I have a lot of creative friends. They make music, they make art and poetry, they make beautiful lives. I'm lucky enough to know them, to be able to talk to them and hear their music, but it would be great if I could introduce them to other people. So I started this podcast. Sometimes we'll be talking to them about how and why they make what they do, and sometimes we'll hear their music. Today, it's a bit of both because my guest is musician, composer, conductor, keyboard player, teacher at York University, and lovely person, Stephanie Martin. That's the opening of Nothing Gold Can Stay from the Frost sequence, a setting of Robert Frost poems by Stephanie Martin, and she's my guest today. I've known Stephanie for, if you can believe it, about 36 years, so as you can imagine, it was tough to know where to start in talking to her for the show. I have so many memories of her, but about 90% of them are of making music together, side by side in a tiny chamber choir, as medieval nuns in a Hildegard von Bingen show, standing in front of her when she's in her role as conductor, or being part of productions with her former Baroque ensemble, the Baroque Trio. She wears so many hats, and she wears them with such grace, so I can't wait to talk to her about it all. We spoke earlier today via Zoom. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for mentioning all that stuff, because we have had a good time, eh?
We have, and it goes back so far. And I was thinking about, the show's called Friend of a Friend, and I do tend to dip into maybe insider things with each person. So I did want to mention those things. But I want to start by, when I went to your website, I saw the first quote that you see when you arrive. And I wanted to preface it by saying, well, you were my TA first.
Oh, gosh.
And that's how we met. So maybe this doesn't sound so funny then when I say, I always thought of you as an exacting musician, like you were right on top of everything. You were good, you know what I mean? So you could read, you were way better than me. And that's always been a thing. So then I loved that when I landed on your webpage, that the tagline was bringing people together through the craft of music. And I wondered if you wanted to talk about that sort of balance between head and heart in music.
Oh, you mentioned in your intro many hats, and I think through the whole vast journey of life, there are many costumes that you wear, and things change, and you kind of have to go with the flow. And I think when I was probably your TA, I was, can I say asshole on your podcast?
You can say it. I don't think you were, but you were young. You were probably trying to be tough or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I was exacting, and that was also the way I was taught. I had very much old school profs.
Oh yeah.
No, I would say that's kind of mellowed, because I have come to understand over the years that really, the really valuable thing about making music is the relationships that you develop. And gosh, you need a community to lean on occasionally, most of your life. So music is a conduit for that, and it works really well. I mean, you find the group that's making music at your, I hesitate to say level, but with your skills, appropriate skills, so you can make something together. And if that is a group striving for excellence or a group that's just getting together at a party around a table, making music with instruments they don't play very well and singing slightly out of tune, there's something special about that too, because people are offering up their sincere selves.
So when I first met you, I said you were my TA, you were an organist, you were a grad student, a teacher, a choir director. That's a lot of things. But over the years, it seems like composition has grown to occupy, could I say, a principal place or certainly a very important place.
Yeah, you could
Were you
absolutely say that. Yeah.
were you always composing and we didn't know it? I mean, you were an organist, so you had to improvise, but
Yeah, the compositional element was there. I would say the earliest element of music making was fooling around on the piano and making up little songs as a child. And I think that's a great way for kids to learn is to have fun and be creative, whatever the instrument is, it's keyboard or singing. But I might have actually studied composition as a student had I thought that there was a future in that, but I didn't at the time. All I could see was performing and making a living as a performer. So that's really what I pursued. Not that I didn't love performing, but there's always a little bit of a conflict between your introverted self and your extroverted self. You go to perform on stage, and I always felt you had to sort of take on a persona to do that, to survive.
yeah.
But my introverted self is quite content doing composition because it is a very solitary thing. You work on your own, but there's a collaborative element as well because you're reaching out to conductors and to the performing groups, the people that will actually bring it to life. When it's on paper, they bring it off the page. So there's definitely a collaborative element.
You've composed so many beautiful sacred choral works, and on your blog, which I'm going to direct people to later, your website,
Lovely.
you tell the story of the very first piece you got published.
Yeah.
And when I read it, I kind of reminded me of Silent Night and Franz Gruber. Like, the organ was broken, and so he had to write the little carol that used guitar. And I wonder, could you tell us the story? Because it's so sweet of something bad turned out to be good.
Yeah, I think it was a silver lining
That was
story
it.
because it was one of those March snowstorms in Toronto, which, descend on the city without much warning in those days. This was around, I guess, 2007. And I work up at York University, and getting downtown to a rehearsal. In those days, I drove my car to work because the subway didn't go to York. That's all changed now. It was a bit of a trek getting downtown through the snow, and I just had so many near fender benders. I just threw in the towel and called a couple of the movers and shakers in the choir and said, I can't make it. You guys, you go ahead without me. And a lot of folks can actually walk to St. Mary Magdalene's, so they got together and rehearsed on their own. And so I was at home feeling quite guilty about this, and I said, I will make this up to the choir by writing them a little song. So I took that well-known text, Ave Verum Corpus, that Mozart said and William Byrd said. We all know it really well. It's a useful anthem for church. So I set that to music, and they sang it beautifully, and we recorded it. And a few years later, I was at a conference, and I was kind of kvetching that it was so hard to get music published because I had sent things around, cold calling publishers saying, here, I've written something. Wouldn't you like to publish it? And got the Dear Jane letters back. But at the conference, there was someone there, Larry Nickel, who had Cypress choral music in Vancouver. He heard the piece and listened to my presentation and approached me after the conference and said, let's publish that. And I think I have a dozen pieces with them now, as well as a few other publishers, one out east in the States and in England. So yeah, so that little motet was something good that came out of a bad night.
I think we should hear it now. It's quite a short piece, so let's hear Ave Verum Corpus by Stephanie Martin. That was Ave Verum Corpus, composed by my guest today, Stephanie Martin, and sung by the choirs of the Church of St. Mary Magdalene in Toronto, with Stephanie herself conducting. At the beginning of the show, I played a little bit from your Frost sequence, Poems of Robert Frost. And you've spoken before, I guess, in your introduction to the performance, you spoke about how the poems themselves kind of deal with themes of time, time passing quickly, or time we can't recover, or whatever. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little more. We'll go deep on this show. If you wanted to
Okay.
talk, you can say
Okay.
no. You can say you don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, I do. I do. Because coincidentally, there's a couple of coincidences about bumping into you this week. But one of them would be that I just got accepted to give a paper at Harbor Voices in Newfoundland in July, and I'm going to talk about music and poetry because there's so many different approaches that people who compose for choirs take when they are looking at text. Some people just like to appreciate the sound of the consonants and the vowels. The meaning of the text is secondary. The rhythmic aspects or the sonic aspects of sounds and words. And, to a certain extent, when you're singing Latin and you don't know what you're singing, there's a certain element of that there. But when you're singing poetry by someone like Robert Frost,
Right, which everybody knows a little bit of from school, if not
I-
more.
yes, exactly. And it's so immediate. It's not 16th century poetry. It's not Shakespeare or something that we're removed from. It's very immediate. It expresses ideas in the way we would, friend to friend. Very simple language, but if you look at all of that as a metaphor, it is really profound. So we could talk for ages about that. But I think I put those three poems together because of that common thread. Nothing gold can stay is pretty obvious out there. It's like if something is beautiful, like leaves in springtime, they change color, they don't last long. And
Mhm.
that's what that first poem is about. And then the central one is the road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as
Mhm.
far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. But you had to make a decision. You can only make the one, you can only travel the one road.
Mhm.
And, reading that now, not as a high school English student, but as a mature person, I read it very differently. And the text that popped out at me was, I shall be telling this with a sigh,
Yeah.
one where ages and ages hence.
He would regret whichever he didn't do.
Exactly.
It was like he was doomed. And I guess I feel like that too at times, right? Do you think I'm going to only be able to have, and maybe you can change somehow, you can find a little lane way back to the original path, but not always.
Maybe, but there it is in the poem. And both that
Yeah.
morning equally lay in leaves. No step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. But knowing
Mm.
how way leads on to
Two
way,
way. Hmm.
I doubted if I would ever come back, if I should ever come back. And those words really popped out at me. I hadn't really realized that as a younger person. I doubted if I should ever come back. And that's the truth. You can't live your life in reverse. Here you are with
No.
the decisions you have made, and there is no going back.
And it wouldn't be the same even, I mean, as you said with the other poem, things are changing all the time anyway. So even if you go back, it's not the same as that moment.
Oh yeah.
I guess it's
Are
like
you-
the epithet, like you cannot step into the same river twice or whatever. It's
Yeah.
sort of the same too, isn't it? And then also I like the way the way you're doing it is you're really reflecting the underlying meaning of the
Yeah.
poems.
The third one is stopping by woods on a snowy evening. And again, when I was putting the poems together, I realized, wait a minute, this is the same poet. This is the ages and ages hence. This is the poet as an old man in winter, coming back, looking into the woods that were yellow when he was young, but now they're wintry and covered in snow. And he looks into the woods and he's tempted to go in there, but he's like, nope, I can't go back. I've got these promises to keep, and I got to go home and get these things done before I sleep. So, yeah, it's kind
Mm.
of like the three poems are seasonal, right? The first one is the springtime, the gold and the leaves, the promise. The middle one is the adventurous, mature person in the yellow wood. And then the following one, the last one, is the winter of this person's life, where they realize, yeah, I'm living with the decisions I made.
We talked about like friendships coming out of music, but how also sometimes you're doing music because of friendships. Like I think that's why I got into choir was because our friend Diane took me along and
Yeah.
I keep quoting Thomas Torino's music as social life, but he talks about how there's this perfect moment of perfection in a human relationship that sometimes happens when you're playing music together, or
Yeah.
dancing.
No, choir has brought together people who otherwise would never know each other. And a lot of people in choirs have lasting, lifelong friendships. There's something very special about it. And I was telling you that I'm also doing Scottish country dancing. It's similar. It's a sort of teamwork thing where you're not communicating verbally with people, but you're living out these complex patterns and relying on each other, relying on the team, the set to fulfill these functions. Meanwhile, you're having fun, tripping around to this lovely, cheery music. It is something you can do for a long, long time. You don't have
We're
to be a young person to do it.
I
So,
was going to say that, like you see the old timers at the dances in Cape Breton for sure.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's lovely to see the older gentlemen in all their kilts coming out for the dances. It's lovely.
You've also talked about how I know that there's women that I know who were very high sopranos who are sort of coming to terms with the loss of the repertoire that they used to be able to sing. But
Yeah.
it's in some cultures, as we've discussed, there's in Gaelic culture, the quality of your voice was not the point. It was how could you sing the song.
Yeah, and in fact, the older you are, the better it is because the more knowledge you have, the more stories you have to tell. So, yeah,
And the more
you're not,
understanding of the poetry, which you've been talking about.
yeah, you have a different perspective.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think you can sing for a long, long time. You just have to roll with the punches. And if you become an alto when you were a soprano, so be it. If you become a tenor, if your voice is suited to a different kind of music, why not explore it instead of beating yourself up that you can't
Right.
do what you did when you were 25? Yeah.
I worry that maybe I picked mostly pretty music of yours to play, like at the top and in the middle here. A lot of things that I describe as luminous, but you also write dramatic music and music that uses much more contemporary vocabulary, and nowhere is that more evident, I think, than in your opera, The Landovery Castle. Is that right?
I would say at the Landovery Castle, but if you're Welsh, you'd probably say Llandovery.
The Landovery Castle, yeah. That's got to be like a pinnacle of an ambitious thing to do, an opera that and with a fairly large cast, right? There's 13 nurses, a matron, there's soldiers. How did it come about that you wrote an opera? Was it the story that grabbed you, or you wanted to write one and you were looking, or what happened?
I had some time set aside for composition, and I did want to write something big. And I think well, not every composer, but for many composers, writing an opera it combines a lot of elements that are very special. So I was casting about for some sort of theme, even the year before I had the composing time. And I was preparing a performance of Berlioz's L'Enfance du Christ. And one of the spaces that was available to us for a big rehearsal was Calvin Presbyterian Church. While setting up for that rehearsal, I noticed a plaque, and it was dedicated to nursing sister Agnes Mackenzie, who died when the Landovery Castle, her hospital ship, was torpedoed in June 1918. near the end of the war. This was not on my radar at all. And apparently it was not on a lot of people's radars, even naval and military historians in Canada. Not a common story, but it was a very prominent news story at the time. And the fact that 14 Canadian women had been killed, the nursing sisters, it was used as propaganda to accelerate some of our military missions.
What operas do you like?
Oh, well, Monteverdi,
Mm-hmm.
the early operas, gosh, Orfeo, 1607. Didn't we study that in our history class?
Yeah, I know these are my favorites too, but you've written something very, it's contemporary in places, but it's familiar
No,
almost. It's kind of like reminds me a bit of Britain.
a composer sitting in the 21st century has so much music to draw upon. And as, a composer, I think you're basically just reaching out and pulling the dramatic music that you need to express the text, because the drama and the words, I think, come first. That's what needs to drive the music.
And that's very Baroque, isn't it? Let the text be the mistress of the music.
Yes, the handmaiden of the text,
Mm,
as
mm.
Thomas Morley said. Yeah, if you let the text guide you, then you're open to use all kinds of different styles of music. And thankfully, I didn't feel restricted on it, because it was not something I was going to be judged on. So I was so surprised that the audience responded kind of like an audience would in a musical. They were kind of more free to respond, because usually, or maybe that is the tradition of opera, isn't it? Was
It
that
should
you
have been, right? I don't think it is anymore, but you should just, didn't they used to encore arias? Like if they really like something, they just encore, you have to sing it again before you could proceed.
Yeah. Well, I guess people still do kind of yell out and applaud at the opera.
Stephanie, I know we could go on for quite a long time and will probably next time we see each other. And I'm really looking forward to singing with your choir, Schola Magdalena, and hopefully singing some of your music very soon. So thank you so much, though, in the meantime, for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for the conversation. It's been really, really pleasant to reconnect with you.
Oh, that's great. Okay, see you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That was my conversation with musician, composer Stephanie Martin. You can read her words, hear her music, find your way to her many recordings at her website, stephaniemartinmusic.com, and I'll be putting that link in the show notes as usual. Thanks again to Stephanie for being on the show. Thank you to Ali Burkock for his theme, and thank you to all of you for tuning in. You can hear and see the entire opera Llandovery Castle on YouTube, but I'd like to go out with some music from the finale. I'm Stephanie Kahn. Bye for now.